There's a particular moment that many people never talk about. The moment right before something good finally begins to settle into their life. A new relationship that feels stable in a way they're not used to. A job opportunity that seems almost too aligned. A friendship that offers real closeness instead of the usual distance. And instead of feeling calm or grateful, there's a quiet tightening in the stomach, a tremor of unease. It doesn't make sense on the surface. Everything is going well. Everything is finally aligning. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a whisper appears, this won't last. Don't trust it. Don't let it get too close. It's a strange kind of fear, not the fear of losing something, but the fear of keeping it. The fear that once something becomes real, once it becomes steady, once it becomes good, you will be expected to be someone who can hold it without shaking. And if you're someone who has learned to brace for disappointment long before it arrives, that kind of goodness can feel unnervingly unfamiliar. This is the emotional tension that pulls beneath so many quiet acts of self-sabotage. Not deliberate destruction. Not dramatic chaos. Just small decisions, the kind that are easy to dismiss, easy to rationalize. Ignoring a message from someone who genuinely cares about you. Arriving late to the job you fought for. Picking a fight over something trivial. Turning away from intimacy the moment it starts to soften your defenses. And even though you might not admit it out loud, part of you knows, there is a pattern here. And eventually, the question begins to surface, quiet but persistent. Why do people destroy what they genuinely want once it finally starts working? When you let this question sit for a moment, the discomfort rises. Not because the answer is judgmental, but because it begins to peel back layers you've managed to keep protected for years. Sabotage doesn't come from laziness or carelessness. It comes from a deeper emotional code, one written long before adulthood, long before you had the language to understand yourself. For many people, the root begins in childhood. Not necessarily in overt harm, but in emotional inconsistencies that taught you to prepare for the floor to fall out from under you. Love that arrived unpredictably. Support that depended on your behavior. Affection given with conditions, or taken away without warning. These experiences plant a quiet belief that good things are temporary, that comfort is a trap, that stability is the setup before the collapse. So when something good appears in your adult life, your nervous system doesn't recognize it as safety. It recognizes it as danger. Not because the thing itself is harmful, but because you've learned that closeness often precedes hurt. That being seen precedes criticism. That depending on someone precedes disappointment. And without consciously choosing it, you start to pull away, to test it, to shake it, to push it, just to confirm what you already fear. See? It was never safe to trust this. It shows up in relationships most clearly. You meet someone steady, someone kind, someone who doesn't make you guess what they feel. At first, you enjoy the predictability, the warmth, the ease. And then, without warning, it begins to feel too exposed. Too vulnerable. You start overthinking your words, your flaws, your role. You become hyper-aware of the very parts of yourself you assume they will eventually reject. And so you preempt the ending by creating distance first. It appears in friendships as well. The moment someone tries to get emotionally closer, you minimize your needs or pull back, terrified of becoming a burden. You tell yourself you're protecting them, but really you're protecting yourself from the discomfort of being chosen. It manifests in career opportunities. You land a position you've wanted for months, maybe years, and instead of feeling empowered, you feel like an imposter waiting to be exposed. You procrastinate, you miss small details, you forget deadlines. Not because you don't care, but because success feels like unfamiliar territory, and failure feels like home. And then there are the moments that happen entirely within you, the emotional breakthroughs, the sudden clarity, the glimpse of a healthier life. You feel it rising, a sense that you could really change, really grow, really open. And in the very next breath, you shut down. Because growth demands vulnerability, and vulnerability demands a trust you never learned to give yourself. As these patterns unfold, the deeper layer begins to reveal itself. Sabotage is not about ruining good things. It is about preventing the emotional exposure that good things require. It is a way of saying, quietly and unconsciously, I would rather lose this now, on my terms, than let it fall apart when I'm unprepared. It is a form of self-protection masquerading as self-destruction. And in its own painful way, it makes emotional sense. Then comes the pivot point, the realization that often arrives softly, like a truth you've been circling around for years. The reason you sabotage good things is not because you don't want them. It's because you don't believe you can survive the pain of losing them once they matter. You undermine what feels real because real things can leave. You avoid what feels genuine because genuine things can break. You close the door on what feels promising because promises have disappointed you before. This insight doesn't accuse. It doesn't shame. It simply illuminates the emotional logic your younger self created to stay safe. And once you see it clearly, you can unsee it. You begin to notice the moments when fear dresses itself as indifference, when avoidance disguises itself as choice, when doubt pretends to be caution. You start to recognize that the voice telling you to pull away is not your adult voice. It's the voice of the version of you who learned to protect themselves at all costs. And as this recognition settles, something quieter begins to unfold. Not a solution, not a strategy, but an internal shift. You start to feel the difference between danger and discomfort. You begin to sense when you are retreating not because something is wrong, but because something is right. Something is real. Something is asking you to stay, to show up, to hold on instead of running before the ending arrives. This is where self-awareness begins to loosen the grip of old patterns. Not by forcing change, but by witnessing the instinct without obeying it immediately. By sitting for a moment with the fear that rises when something good enters your life, and realizing that the fear comes from the past, not the present. By noticing that your desire for connection is real, even if your defenses insist otherwise. And as the narrative softens toward its end, the tone shifts into something gentler. This isn't about judging the ways you've protected yourself. It's about understanding them deeply enough to choose differently when you're ready. It's about recognizing that sabotage has never been a sign of weakness, only a sign of someone who learned to survive with limited emotional tools. The good things in your life are not threats. They are invitations. Invitations to step into a life that doesn't require constant bracing. A life where stability doesn't feel foreign. A life where tenderness doesn't feel dangerous. You don't have to ruin the good things to feel safe. You deserve a life that doesn't collapse the moment it becomes real.